Good afternoon, church. This is Dennis Sanders from First Christian Church of St. Paul. And so for this week, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about adjectives and how we describe ourselves and how do we describe who we are as a community of faith, especially in a politically polarized time. So this week I was kind of thinking, as many of you know, I do a lot of work in digital media and writing, and I was thinking about our own website for First Christian Church, and thinking about SEO, search engine optimization, and what words people would use to find our congregation. And I kept wondering, and for many years have wondered, should we describe ourselves as a progressive congregation? And for a long time, I've resisted that. And on the surface, in many ways, we are, in some ways, a progressive congregation. We are an open and affirming church. We welcome LGBTQ people. You have me as an out gay man who is married as the pastor. We're a church that believes in caring for the marginalized and for the poor, and we believe in diversity. We are, even for a very small congregation, a pretty diverse bunch. So in some ways, yeah, you could say that. But I think too often when we use these words, and I don't want to make it sound like it's just on the left, but it's also on the right. We use progressive and conservative in front of the word Christian. And sometimes what happens is that word, which is an adjective, in some ways almost becomes a noun. We are so tied up in this age of our identity, of who we are. And so it becomes almost like a straitjacket. And there are some times when I've seen both conservative and liberal who are so bound up in being a progressive and being a conservative that they forget that other half of the word, the Christian, that we're followers of Jesus. And that is what's important. Of course, it still doesn't answer the question, should we describe ourselves as a progressive congregation? And, in some ways, as I said, we are. But I think that what's more important isn't that we are politically progressive or politically conservative, that we're not cheerleaders for the Democrats because we're a progressive, or cheerleaders as a conservative Christians that support and the Republican Party. Because what's important and what we want is to be a church that welcomes people, and especially welcomes people from different walks of life. One of the things as disciples that's important is that we believe in the centrality of the communion table, that it's not our table, it's God's table, and that God welcomes everyone to the table. And I remember several years ago, Sharon Watkins, who was the general minister and president, talked about the importance of people staying at the table, even when they disagree. And that caused a lot of friction among people, because they were some people who, especially who are gay and who have had religious trauma, that don't want someone who is different at the table. And I get that. But it is also important that we have and try to find ways of communicating and talking with one another. And it's important that we are at the table together. Not everyone who is at churches believe the same way. I, for one, would not be considered politically progressive. I tend to vote sometimes more on the center-right, sometimes libertarian. I have sometimes different viewpoints, and I know that even within our congregation there are probably very different viewpoints politically. But it's important to me that we find ways of staying at the table, find ways of reaching out towards one another, seeing each other as children of God, because so often in our culture there's so little space where we can actually really talk to one another even when we disagree. So, are we a progressive congregation? Probably. But I think what's more important is that we love God and we love others. And that is something that we are called to do regardless of how we vote or what we think on various issues. And that's what matters. Probably won't easily fit for search engine optimization, but I do think it is what God calls us to be. A people that loves God passionately, but also loves others just as passionately. Well, that's it for this week. Take care, church. Blessings.